Hello everyone, since many of you use these videos to help you sleep, I thought it would be fun to ask you to leave a comment, letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, if you could like and subscribe, that would be great. Now, let's begin. I never believed in the paranormal. Ghosts, spirits, haunted places. They were just myths. Stories told to scare children or to keep them in line. That was until I spent a night in the Whispering Forest. It started as a dare, as these things often do. A group of friends, a few too many drinks, and the bravado that only youth and alcohol can bring. We were camping near the edge of the forest, a place with a reputation that stretched back centuries. Locals said it was cursed, that the trees were alive with the souls of the damned, and that anyone who entered would never return. Naturally, we didn't believe a word of it. "Let's go in," Paul suggested, his voice slurred but filled with excitement. "Just for a bit, see if we can hear the whispers." The others laughed, but I hesitated. There was something about the way the trees loomed over us, even from a distance, that made my skin crawl. They seemed almost to breathe, to move ever so slightly in the still night air. "Come on, don't be a chicken," Sarah taunted, shoving me lightly. Her eyes were bright with mischief, daring me to refuse. I couldn't back down, not in front of them. So, with a heavy sigh, I agreed. We grabbed our flashlights and ventured into the forest. The moment we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed. The air grew colder, thicker, as if it was pressing down on us. The trees, tall and twisted, blocked out the moonlight, casting long, eerie shadows that danced as we moved. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic, but I tried to push the fear down. We walked deeper into the forest, the laughter and jokes fading as the oppressive silence wrapped around us. I kept expecting to hear something, an owl, the rustling of leaves, anything, but the forest was dead quiet. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, swallowed by the darkness. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Paul stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. We all froze, straining to listen. At first there was nothing, just the deafening silence. But then, faintly, almost imperceptibly, I heard it. A whisper, soft, unintelligible, but definitely there. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound confident. But the words felt hollow. The whisper grew louder, closer, until it surrounded us. It was coming from all directions, an insidious hiss that crawled into my ears and burrowed into my mind. "Let's go back," Sarah suggested, her bravado gone. She looked as terrified as I felt. We turned to leave, but the way back had vanished. The trees had closed in, creating a wall of wood and shadow. Panic surged through me as I realized we were trapped. "Stay together," Paul ordered, though his voice wavered. We huddled close, flashlights flickering as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer just noises, they were words, though still too faint to understand. Then the forest came alive. The trees creaked and groaned, their branches twisting like skeletal arms. The ground beneath us shifted, soft and spongy, as if it were breathing. I could feel the forest's heartbeat, a slow, rhythmic pulse that vibrated through my entire body. I don't know who screamed first, but soon we were all running, desperate to escape. The forest seemed to laugh, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. The whispers turned to screams, voices filled with agony and despair, echoing in my head until I thought I would go mad. I don't remember how long we ran, but eventually I found myself alone. The others were gone, swallowed by the forest. My flashlight flickered one last time before dying, plunging me into complete darkness. I stood there, panting, my heart racing. As the whispers surrounded me, I could feel them now, cold, ghostly fingers brushing against my skin, tugging at my clothes. I tried to move, but my legs refused to cooperate. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to do anything but listen. The voices grew louder, clearer, until I could understand them. They were calling my name, over and over, each repetition more desperate than the last. They weren't just whispers. They were pleas, cries for help from souls long lost to the forest. And then I saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows, their forms barely distinguishable from the trees. They were twisted, deformed, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed. They reached out to me, their fingers like claws, their mouths open in silent screams. I tried to run, but it was too late. The forest had me. They closed in, their cold hands gripping me, pulling me down into the earth. I struggled, but it was no use. The ground opened up, and I was swallowed by darkness. As I was dragged into the depths, the whispers filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I could feel the forest around me, inside me, its presence overwhelming. I was no longer just me, I was part of it, consumed by the very thing I had laughed at only hours before. And then everything went silent. When I woke, I was lying on the forest floor, the morning light filtering through the trees. The others were gone, and the forest was still, as if nothing had happened, but I knew better. I could feel it inside me, the darkness, the whispers, waiting for the night to fall again. I stumbled back to camp, my mind a blur. No one believed my story. They said I must have gotten lost, that the others probably went back to town, but I knew the truth. The forest had taken them, and it would take me too one day. I can still hear the whispers at night, growing louder with each passing day. I know it's only a matter of time before the forest comes for me, and when it does, there will be no escape. A year ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. My life had been normal until that night, a quiet, uneventful routine that I'd grown accustomed to. I was working the late shift at a small-town diner, a job that suited me just fine. The customers were usually regulars, older folks who liked their coffee black and their conversations slow. The tips weren't great, but the work was steady and the nights were peaceful. That peace shattered one cold, moonless night in October. The diner was nearly empty, just me and a couple of regulars nursing their late-night coffees. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the only sound apart from the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I was wiping down the counter when the door swung open with a sharp jingle of the bell. I looked up, expecting to see one of the usuals, but instead, a stranger walked in. He was tall, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His coat was long, brushing the tops of his scuffed boots, and his hands were gloved, despite the mild weather. Something about him made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He moved silently, almost gliding across the floor as he approached the counter. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unease that crept over me. "Evening," I greeted, my voice a little too bright. "What can I get for you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slowly raised his head, and I caught a glimpse of his eyes, dark, piercing, and entirely too intense. They seemed to look right through me, as if he could see every thought, every fear, every secret I'd ever had. I found myself frozen under that gaze, unable to look away. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and smooth, with an accent I couldn't place. "Coffee," he said. "Black." I nodded, grateful for the excuse to turn away and busy myself with the coffee pot. My hands shook as I poured the coffee, spilling a few drops onto the counter. I cursed under my breath and wiped them away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. When I turned back, he was still staring at me, those dark eyes unblinking. I set the cup down in front of him, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he kept his gaze locked on me, as if he was waiting for something. "Anything else?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shook his head slowly, still not touching the coffee. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive, until I couldn't take it anymore. I mumbled something about checking on the other customers and practically fled to the other end of the counter. The two regulars were still there, but they seemed oblivious to the strange man at the counter. They were deep in conversation, their voices low, and didn't even glance in his direction. I considered talking to them, maybe mentioning the odd customer, but something stopped me. I didn't want to draw attention to him, didn't want to acknowledge his presence more than I already had. Minutes passed, then an hour, and still, he didn't touch his coffee. He just sat there, staring at me whenever I dared to glance his way. The diner felt colder, the lights dimmer, and the clock seemed to tick louder with each passing second. I tried to focus on my work, on anything other than the man at the counter, but it was impossible. His presence was overwhelming, suffocating. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get out of there, even if just for a moment. I made some excuse about needing fresh air and stepped outside, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. The night was eerily quiet. The street was empty, not a single car or person in sight. The only light came from the diner's neon sign, casting a sickly yellow glow on the pavement. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes and trying to shake the unease that clung to me like a shadow. That's when I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like someone walking across gravel. My eyes snapped open and I looked around, but the street was still empty. The sound came again, closer this time, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned towards the source of the noise, my breath catching in my throat. At first I saw nothing but darkness, but as my eyes adjusted, I noticed a figure standing just outside the circle of light from the diner's sign. It was tall and thin, its features obscured by the shadows. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. It just stood there watching me. My skin prickled with a sense of impending dread, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from that figure as possible. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the shadowy figure. Slowly it began to move, gliding towards me with an unnatural grace. The closer it got, the more I could make out its features, or rather, the lack of them. It was like a silhouette, a human-shaped void, darker than the night itself. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure stopped just a few feet away from me, and I could feel its presence like a physical weight pressing down on me. I wanted to run, to hide, but my body refused to obey. Suddenly the diner door burst open, the bell jingling loudly. The regulars, the two men I'd left inside, came rushing out, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. They didn't say a word, just grabbed me by the arm and dragged me back inside. The door slammed shut behind us, the lock clicking into place. The moment we were inside, the warmth of the diner wrapped around me, and the oppressive cold from outside seemed to vanish. The two men were breathing heavily, their faces lined with terror. What was that?" I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. They exchanged a glance, their expressions grim. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice low and urgent. "You shouldn't have gone outside," he said. "Not when he's here." "Who?" I asked, my mind racing. "The man at the counter?" The other man shook his head. "No, not him, the one outside. He comes when the visitor does. They're connected somehow. We don't know how, but they are." I glanced back at the counter, half expecting to see the tall man still sitting there. But he was gone. The coffee cup was still there, untouched, but the stool was empty. I felt a fresh wave of panic rise in my chest. "Where did he go?" I asked, my voice rising. "We don't know," the first man replied, his voice shaking. "But he always leaves before the other one arrives. It's like he knows." The other man nodded in agreement. "We've seen him before. The stranger comes in, orders coffee, never drinks it, and just watches. Then, when he leaves, the other one appears." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded insane, like something out of a horror movie. But the fear in their eyes was real, and so was the terror I'd felt outside. "What do we do now?" I asked, feeling utterly helpless. The first man sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "We wait. He usually doesn't stay long, but we can't leave, not until we're sure he's gone." We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the tension thick in the air. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open and the shadowy figure to come inside. But nothing happened. The clock on the wall ticked away the minutes, each one dragging out longer than the last. Finally, just as the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, the men visibly relaxed. The first one nodded at me. "It's over. For now." "For now?" I echoed, my voice trembling. The other man nodded. "He'll be back. They both will. But you'll know now. You'll know to stay inside." I wanted to ask more questions, to demand answers, but I was too exhausted, too drained to think straight. The men paid their bill, leaving a generous tip, and left without another word. I never saw them again. They stopped coming to the diner, and no one else ever mentioned the strange visitor or his terrifying counterpart. But I knew they were still out there, waiting. And every night, when the sun sets and the shadows lengthen, I think about that night. I think about the stranger who sat at the counter, watching me with those dark, piercing eyes. And I think about the figure that waited outside, a shadow in the darkness. I still work at the diner, still serve the regulars and the occasional traveler, but I never stay late, never work the night shift, and I never ever go outside after dark, because I know they'll come back, and next time I might not be so lucky. I'd been working at the old hotel for almost a year when the incident occurred. The hotel had a reputation. Everyone in town knew it was old, run down, and haunted. Most dismissed the stories as old wives' tales, but I'd heard enough strange accounts from guests to know something was off. Still, I needed the job and the pay was decent, so I stayed. One rainy night in October, the hotel was unusually empty. The storm had driven away all but a few guests, and those who remained were in for an even stranger experience. I was manning the front desk when a new guest arrived, a man in his late 40s, with a tired face and a suitcase that seemed too small for his needs. "I'd like a room, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I glanced at the register, noting that the hotel was nearly empty. "We have plenty of rooms available. Would you like a standard room or a suite?" "Just a standard room will do," he replied, his eyes darting around as if he were looking for something or trying to avoid being seen. I handed him a key to room 13. I usually avoided assigning that room, given its reputation, but it was one of the few left. He took it without a word and headed to the elevator. The night wore on, and I almost forgot about the man in room 13. It wasn't until around midnight that things took a turn. I was reading a book in the lobby when the phone rang. The line was static-filled, but I could make out a shaky voice on the other end. "Hello? Hello, is someone there?" the voice croaked. I answered, "Yes, this is the hotel. How can I help you?" There was a pause, then the voice said, "I need help. There's something wrong with the room." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. Concerned, I grabbed a flashlight and headed up to room 13. When I reached the door, it was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and called out, "Hello? Is everything okay?" The room was dark, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the space through the rain-streaked windows. The man was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale and his eyes wide with terror. "Are you all right?" I asked, stepping closer. I don't know," he stammered. "I keep hearing things, footsteps, whispers. I thought I was imagining it, but it's real." I looked around the room, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. "Have you tried turning on the lights or calling the front desk?" He shook his head. "I did, but I couldn't get through, and every time I try to leave, I feel like something's stopping me." I frowned, unsure of what to do. I decided to stay with him for a while, hoping it would calm his nerves and help him make sense of what he was experiencing. As the storm raged outside, we sat in the dark, listening to the howling wind and the occasional crash of thunder. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, almost oppressive, and I could sense an underlying tension that made my skin crawl. Then, I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible, whispers coming from the far corner of the room. I turned my flashlight in that direction, but there was nothing there. The man's eyes were fixed on the same spot, his fear palpable. "It's coming from over there," he whispered. I approached the corner, my flashlight sweeping over the wall and the small closet there. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, like a dozen voices murmuring in unison. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt an icy chill creep up my spine. Suddenly, the closet door creaked open by itself, and a gust of cold air blasted out. I jumped back, my flashlight flickering wildly. The man gasped, clutching the bedpost. I hesitated for a moment before mustering the courage to approach the closet. I opened it fully, revealing nothing but old linens and a few dusty hangers. But as I shone the flashlight around, I noticed something strange. A faint, shadowy figure standing in the farthest corner of the closet. It was barely visible, a dark, amorphous shape that seemed to pulse and shift with the shadows. I could make out features, eyes, a mouth, but they were twisted and distorted, like a nightmarish version of a face. "Do you see that?" I asked the man, my voice trembling. He nodded, his face pale with fear. "Yes, what is that?" Before I could answer, the figure seemed to move, its form coalescing into a more defined shape. It reached out towards us, its dark fingers stretching from the closet. I felt a cold draft, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. I grabbed the man's arm and pulled him towards the door. "We need to get out of here now." We fled the room, slamming the door behind us. The whispers continued, muffled but persistent, even as we stood in the hallway. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the room was empty. No sign of the strange figure, no evidence of the disturbances. The man was nowhere to be found, and he never returned to the hotel. I tried to investigate further, but the room was as ordinary as any other, the mysterious occurrences never repeating. I continued to work at the hotel, but room 13 was left vacant, its door locked and sealed. The whispers never returned, but sometimes, late at night, I still hear them, a faint, mournful murmur that reminds me of that terrifying night. And I wonder if the figure is still there, waiting for someone else to discover its presence. My family had just moved into the old farmhouse on the edge of town, and I was excited to explore the vast, creaky house. It was everything I had hoped for, full of character, with hidden corners and forgotten rooms waiting to be discovered. But there was one room that intrigued me the most, the attic. The attic was enormous, filled with dusty old furniture, old trunks and relics of the past. It was the kind of place that begged to be explored, and I spent hours rummaging through the piles of old clothes and antiques. One day, while digging through a particularly dusty trunk, I found an old, ornate mirror. It was beautiful, framed in intricately carved wood and covered with a delicate silver filigree. The glass was old, slightly cloudy, but still reflected light with a faint, ghostly glow. I decided to take it downstairs and clean it up. As I carried the mirror to my room, I felt an odd sense of unease. It was just a mirror, but something about it felt off. I shrugged it off and set it up against the wall in my bedroom, admiring its craftsmanship. It was a perfect addition to my room, and I didn't think much more about it. That night, I went to bed early, feeling content with my day's discoveries, but as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I tried to ignore it, turning away from the mirror and burying myself under the covers. In the dead of night, I was jolted awake by a strange sound, like a faint scratching, coming from the direction of the mirror. I turned over, my eyes darting toward the mirror. The room was dim, illuminated only by the faint light from the street lamp outside. I stared at the mirror, trying to make out any shapes or shadows. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror was not quite right. It seemed darker, more distorted than the actual room. I sat up, my heart racing. The reflection in the mirror showed a shadowy figure standing behind me, just out of view. It was tall and indistinct, its features obscured by darkness. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was gone. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. But the feeling of being watched persisted, and I couldn't shake the sense of dread that clung to me. Over the next few nights, the situation only got worse. The shadowy figure appeared more frequently, always just out of sight in the mirror's reflection. I would hear soft whispers, like a voice speaking in a language I couldn't understand, and the figure would move closer, its form becoming more defined. I tried to tell my parents about it, but they dismissed it as stress from the move or an overactive imagination. I even tried to cover the mirror with a blanket, but the whispers continued, seeping through the fabric and disturbing my sleep. One night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting the mirror. I took a deep breath and stood in front of it, determined to face the shadowy figure. As I stared into the glass, I could see it clearly now. A dark, almost humanoid shape with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The figure didn't answer, but its eyes seemed to glow brighter, and the whispers grew louder. I could make out fragments of words, but they were unintelligible, a jumble of sounds that made my head ache. In a sudden burst of courage, I reached out and touched the mirror. The moment my fingers made contact with the glass, I felt a jolt of cold energy surge through me. The figure in the mirror seemed to reach out as well, its shadowy hand stretching towards mine. I yanked my hand away, stumbling back. The figure's expression seemed to change, shifting from one of anger to one of sadness. The whispers became a mournful wail, filling the room with a sense of deep sorrow. I didn't know what to do, so I ran from the room, leaving the mirror behind. I spent the rest of the night in my parents' room, unable to sleep. The next morning, I was exhausted and on edge, but the mirror was still there, silent and still. I decided to take the mirror down to the basement and cover it with a heavy cloth. I hoped that would keep the whispers at bay and let me get some rest. The basement was dark and cold, but it felt safer than the haunted bedroom. After that night, I never saw the shadowy figure again, but the mirror remained in the basement, a haunting reminder of the presence that once disturbed my sleep. I don't know what it was or why it chose to haunt that mirror, but I learned that some things are better left undisturbed. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I think I hear the faintest whispers from the basement, a reminder that the shadow in the mirror might not be gone forever. And I know deep down that some reflections should never be fully revealed. My new apartment was perfect, or so I thought. It was in an old building downtown with high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a great view of the city skyline. It was exactly what I was looking for: a little bit of history, a touch of character, and a decent price for a place right in the middle of everything. I moved in on a chilly September afternoon, the last rays of sunlight casting a golden hue across the apartment. Everything was in order, except for one strange thing I noticed while unpacking, a door that I hadn't noticed during the tour. It was tucked away at the end of a narrow hallway, painted the same color as the walls, almost as if someone had tried to hide it. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe it led to a closet or a storage space, but when I tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was locked tight, and I couldn't find a key anywhere. I decided to leave it for the time being, figuring it was just a quirk of the old building. The first few nights in the apartment were uneventful. I settled into a routine, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with living alone. But the more time I spent in the apartment, the more that door began to bother me. It was always there, at the end of the hallway, a constant presence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. One night, after a long day at work, I decided to try the door again. This time, I put more effort into it, jiggling the handle and even giving the door a few hard shoves. But it didn't move. Frustrated, I pressed my ear against the door, trying to listen for any sounds on the other side. At first, there was nothing but silence. But then, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like someone lightly knocking on the other side. My heart skipped a beat, and I pulled back, staring at the door in shock. I listened again, but the sound was gone. I convinced myself it was just the old pipes, or maybe the building settling. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined something behind that door, waiting to get out. Over the next few days, the tapping grew louder. It became a steady, insistent knock, like someone trapped and desperate to escape. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know what was behind that door. I searched the apartment for anything that could help, keys, tools, anything. I even asked the landlord about it, but he just shrugged and said the door had been sealed for years, that it led to an old, unused part of the building. But he didn't seem sure, and his vague answer only fueled my curiosity. One evening, as the knocking reached a fever pitch, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. Armed with a crowbar I'd borrowed from a neighbor, I marched down the hallway and jammed the tool into the crack of the door. It took all my strength, but eventually, I felt the wood give way, and the door creaked open. A rush of cold air hit me as the door swung open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. The smell of damp earth and decay wafted up from below, and I hesitated, my stomach twisting with unease. But something compelled me to continue. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through the darkness as I descended the stairs. The walls were lined with crumbling plaster, and the steps groaned under my weight. I felt like I was descending into another world, a forgotten part of the building that had been sealed off for a reason. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick and oppressive, and the walls were covered in strange symbols, scratched into the plaster with what looked like nails or something sharp. The floor was littered with debris, old newspapers and broken furniture, but what caught my eye was the large, heavy door on the opposite wall. It was different from the other doors, thicker, reinforced with metal, and covered in more of those strange symbols. The knocking was louder now, almost deafening, as if whatever was behind that door knew I was there. My hands shook as I approached the door. There was no handle, no lock, just a small, round peephole set into the wood. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I leaned forward, pressing my eye to the peephole. At first, all I saw was darkness, but then slowly, something moved into view. A pale, ghostly face, eyes wide and staring right at me. Its mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, and then it smiled. A twisted, malevolent grin that sent a chill down my spine. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight as the knocking grew even louder, the door rattling in its frame. I turned and ran up the stairs, not daring to look back. The moment I reached the top, I slammed the door shut and pushed a heavy piece of furniture against it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, clutching the crowbar, listening to the knocking that never seemed to stop. It echoed through the apartment, growing fainter but never fully disappearing. The next morning, I called the landlord and told him I was moving out. He didn't ask why, just muttered something about the place being difficult and let me out of the lease. I packed my things and left that same day, not even bothering to look back. I never found out what was behind that door, or who or what had been knocking, but sometimes late at night I still hear that sound, faint and far away, as if it's following me. And I know that door, wherever it is, will always be waiting for someone else to open it. The town where I grew up had a rule: never go out after dark. As kids, we thought it was just something parents said to keep us safe. But the older we got, the more we realized it was something deeper, something darker. Everyone knew someone who had disappeared. They weren't just lost, they were erased from memory. No one talked about them. It was like they never existed. One night, my friend Liam and I, full of teenage bravado, decided to test the rule. We planned to meet at the edge of the woods just after sunset. The woods were dense, thick with trees that blocked out the moonlight. They were the last place anyone wanted to be after dark, but we didn't care. We wanted to prove that the stories were just that, stories. When I got there, Liam was already waiting. He looked nervous, more so than I'd ever seen him. We laughed it off and headed into the woods. We didn't need flashlights. We knew the paths well enough. But as we walked, the silence became oppressive. No wind, no rustling leaves, not even the sound of our own footsteps. Then, we saw them. At first, I thought they were just shadows, tricks of the light, but they moved. They slid between the trees, silent and smooth, their forms barely distinguishable from the darkness around them. They had no eyes, no faces, just vague human shapes that seemed to absorb the light around them. Liam grabbed my arm, his grip tight with fear. We started to back away, but the silent ones were faster. They didn't move like normal people. They glided, like smoke on the wind, closing in on us with each second. I whispered to Liam that we needed to run, but when I looked at him, his face was blank. His eyes were wide, staring, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me. I turned slowly, and there was one of them, inches from my face. I could feel the cold radiating off of it, the void where its face should have been. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The silent one raised its hand, a hand that was more shadow than flesh, and reached out to touch my face. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my skin, freezing me to the core. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was watch as it enveloped me in darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I was standing alone in the woods. No silent ones, no Liam, just me, the trees, and the darkness. I ran. I don't remember how I made it out of those woods, but I did. I stumbled into town, breathless and terrified, but when I tried to tell people what had happened, they just looked at me with blank faces like they didn't understand, like they didn't remember Liam at all. I moved away soon after that. I never went back. But every now and then, when I'm alone in the dark, I can feel that cold, creeping up my spine, reminding me that they're still out there, waiting.
Chapter 1. The Inheritance.
The estate, a sprawling relic of an era long past, had always been a subject of whispered rumors and hushed conversations. As I turned the final bend and saw the mansion come into view, a shiver ran down my spine. The estate, inherited from my estranged uncle, was a grand but decaying masterpiece of Gothic architecture. Its imposing towers and arched windows seemed to cast long, eerie shadows against the overcast sky. My uncle had been a recluse, a man of peculiar habits and secrets. His will was brief and enigmatic, leaving me with the mansion and a few cryptic instructions. "Take care of the estate," it said simply, "and beware the uninvited guest." The phrase lingered in my mind as I approached the mansion, its darkened windows seeming to watch me as I neared. The interior of the house was a maze of dimly lit hallways and grand, dust-covered rooms. The once majestic furniture was draped in white sheets, and the air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. Each room I explored seemed to tell a story of a bygone era, with faded tapestries, tarnished silver, and cobweb-covered chandeliers. Despite the mansion's grandeur, an unsettling atmosphere pervaded every corner. The silence was occasionally broken by the creak of old wood and the faint rustling of fabric. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with each passing hour, but I chalked it up to the house's age and my own overactive imagination. Chapter 2. Settling in. The first few nights in the mansion were restless. My attempts to adapt to the mansion's cold, drafty rooms were met with a growing sense of unease. The silence was occasionally interrupted by strange noises, a faint scratching sound or a soft, distant whisper. At first, I attributed these noises to the house settling, or the wind howling through the old windows. One evening, as I was exploring the attic, I stumbled upon a trunk hidden beneath a pile of old linens. Inside, I found a collection of old letters, photographs, and a worn, leather-bound journal. The journal, its pages yellowed with age, seemed to contain the musings of a troubled mind. It was filled with erratic entries about strange occurrences, and a recurring mention of a malevolent presence referred to as the uninvited guest. The more I read, the more I became convinced that the journal's author had experienced something truly terrifying. The entries described a shadowy figure that seemed to haunt the mansion's occupants, feeding off their fear and despair. The final entries were hastily written and spoke of a ritual that might banish the entity, but warned of the ritual's dangers. Chapter 3. The Journal's Secrets. The journal was both fascinating and chilling. Its detailed accounts of previous inhabitants who had encountered the guest painted a grim picture. The entity described was not merely a ghost, but a powerful, malevolent force. It seemed to prey on the vulnerability of those who entered the mansion, growing stronger with each act of fear it induced. I decided to investigate the history of the mansion further. I visited the local library and spoke with elderly residents who had lived in the area for decades. Many of them spoke in hushed tones about the mansion's dark past. Some claimed it was cursed, while others whispered about the strange behavior of its past occupants. The more I learned, the more I realized that the mansion had a long history of unexplained phenomena and tragic events. Previous owners had reported similar occurrences, objects moving on their own, eerie noises, and sightings of shadowy figures. The accounts varied, but the common thread was always the presence of an unseen, malevolent force. Chapter 4. The haunting intensifies. As days turned into weeks, the disturbances in the mansion grew more intense. I would frequently wake up to find objects moved from their places or hear strange noises coming from the walls. The temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, and an oppressive, cold feeling would settle around me. The mirror room, where I had first encountered the entity's presence, became a focal point of my growing fear. The shattered mirror seemed to hold a dark energy, and I often found myself drawn back to it despite my growing terror. It was as if the room itself was alive, pulsing with an unseen force. One night, while trying to sleep, I was jolted awake by a cold breeze that seemed to sweep through the room. I could hear whispers, soft, disembodied voices that seemed to come from all directions. The whispers grew louder and more insistent, their tone mocking and cruel. I felt a presence hovering just out of sight, watching me with malevolent intent. My attempts to reach out to friends and family for support were met with frustration. My calls went unanswered, and I began to feel increasingly isolated. The mansion seemed to have a life of its own, and I couldn't escape its oppressive atmosphere. The entity's influence over me grew stronger, and I found myself slipping into a state of paranoia and fear. Chapter 5. The Ritual. Desperation drove me to try the ritual described in the journal. I gathered the items mentioned, candles, salt, and the ancient amulet, and prepared to perform the ceremony in the basement, where the entity's presence was most strongly felt. The basement was a dark, damp place, its walls lined with old stone and cobwebs. I set up the candles in a circle and placed the salt around the perimeter, hoping to create a protective barrier. The amulet, cold and heavy in my hand, seemed to pulse with a faint energy. As I began to recite the incantations from the journal, the atmosphere in the room became charged with a palpable sense of tension. The candles flickered and dimmed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air grew colder, and I could hear the entity's whispers growing louder, a discordant symphony of malice and anger. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness. The entity's presence was overwhelming, its growls and roars echoing through the basement. I struggled to relight the candles, but the darkness seemed to consume everything. The whispers turned into guttural growls, and I could feel the entity's cold breath on my neck. Chapter 6. The Entity Revealed. The ritual's progress was interrupted by a violent surge of energy. The basement seemed to warp and distort, the walls closing in on me. The entity's growls became a deafening roar, and I could feel its malevolent presence pressing against me. In a desperate bid to regain control, I clutched the amulet tightly and continued the incantations, hoping that it would be enough to banish the entity. The amulet began to glow with an intense light, cutting through the darkness. The entity's growls turned into wails of anguish, and the oppressive weight in the room began to lift. The shadows that had clung to the walls seemed to recede, and the temperature gradually returned to normal. I felt a surge of hope as the entity's presence diminished, its power waning with each passing moment. Exhausted and disoriented, I finished the ritual and watched as the entity's presence vanished. The basement was now eerily quiet, the air heavy with the remnants of the entity's influence. The mirror's shattered pieces lay scattered on the floor, their sinister reflections gone. Chapter 7. The Aftermath. The following morning, the estate was bathed in a weak, hazy light. The storm had passed, and the mansion felt different, less oppressive, but still heavy with the memories of the previous nights. The sense of being watched had faded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion still held some lingering darkness. I spent the day cleaning and organizing, determined to restore some semblance of normalcy to the mansion. The memories of the haunting were fresh, and I found myself constantly on edge, expecting the entity to return. The house, though quieter, still seemed to harbor an unsettling presence. As I prepared to leave the estate, I took one last look around. The mansion, though still grand, felt different. Its dark history seemed to have been momentarily lifted. I packed my belongings and decided it was time to move on, hoping that the worst was behind me. Chapter 8. Moving on. Driving away from the estate, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The mansion had been a source of both fascination and terror, and I couldn't help but wonder if the entity had truly been banished, or if it was simply biding its time for the next occupant. The drive through the countryside was tranquil, a stark contrast to the turmoil I had experienced in the mansion. As the estate receded into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion's dark legacy would remain with me. I arrived at a small town and found a modest apartment to settle into. The transition from the grand but eerie mansion to a more ordinary setting was jarring. I tried to focus on the present and the future, but the memories of the estate lingered. Chapter 9. Lingering Shadows. Even after moving on, the memories of the mansion continued to haunt me. I found it difficult to sleep, plagued by nightmares of dark figures and oppressive shadows. The feeling of being watched never completely dissipated, and I often found myself looking over my shoulder, expecting the entity to reappear. I began to research more about the mansion's history, hoping to understand the nature of the entity and its connection to the house. My investigations led me to old records and archives that hinted at dark practices and forbidden rituals carried out by previous occupants. The more I learned, the more I realized that the mansion was a nexus of supernatural activity, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin and porous. Despite my efforts to move forward, I couldn't escape the shadow of the mansion's past. The experiences I had endured left a lasting impact on my psyche. I found solace in writing about my experiences, hoping that sharing my story might help me make sense of the terror I had faced. Chapter 10. The Legacy of the Mansion. Months passed, and I began to adjust to my new life. The nightmares grew less frequent, and the feeling of being watched slowly diminished. However, the legacy of the mansion remained a part of me. I continued to investigate paranormal phenomena and haunted locations, driven by a need to understand and confront the unknown. The mansion, now a distant memory, still held a grip on my thoughts. I occasionally received updates from real estate agents and local news about the estate's condition. Each update mentioned new occupants and strange occurrences, hinting that the entity's influence might not have been completely eradicated. I realized that the mansion's dark legacy was not something that could be easily put behind. The uninvited guest had left its mark on me, and I knew that its story would continue to unfold in the annals of the mansion's history. The estate remained a place of mystery and darkness, a testament to the malevolent force that had haunted me. Chapter 11. Reflections on Fear. Years later, as I looked back on my experiences, I understood that the mansion had been a crucible of fear and revelation. The terror I faced had changed me, and the memories of the uninvited guests were etched into my consciousness. I had survived the ordeal, but the impact of the entity's presence had shaped my perspective on fear and the supernatural. I continued to share my story through writing and speaking engagements, hoping to shed light on the mysteries of the paranormal. The mansion's dark history remained a cautionary tale, a reminder of the unknown forces that lurk in the shadows. The uninvited guest had left an indelible mark on my life, and I knew that its legacy would continue to resonate long after I was gone. The mansion, with its secrets and shadows, would forever be a part of my story, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies beyond the veil of the ordinary. Chapter 12. The Final Encounter. In a twist of fate, I received a call one day from a historian interested in the mansion's history. They had uncovered new information that hinted at an even darker chapter in the estate's past. Intrigued and apprehensive, I agreed to meet with them and discuss the findings. The historian's research revealed that the mansion had been built on an ancient burial ground, and the entity might have been a guardian spirit bound to protect the sacred site. The rituals and occurrences described in the journal were attempts to communicate with or appease the spirit, but the methods used had only strengthened its hold over the estate. The revelation added a new layer to the mansion's story. The uninvited guest was not merely a malevolent force, but a guardian spirit, whose purpose had been misunderstood and corrupted. The knowledge provided a sense of closure, but also deepened the mystery of the mansion's history. As I pondered the new information, I felt a mixture of relief and unease. The entity's true nature was more complex than I had imagined, and the mansion's dark legacy had taken on a new dimension. The final encounter with the historian was a reminder of the ongoing mysteries of the paranormal and the enduring impact of the uninvited guest. Chapter 13. Moving Forward. With the new insights, I continued to explore the realms of the paranormal, driven by a desire to understand the forces that lie beyond our comprehension. The mansion's legacy remained a significant part of my journey, a reminder of the dark and enigmatic world that exists alongside our own. The uninvited guest, with its malevolent presence and dark history, had left an indelible mark on my life. The mansion, though now a distant memory, continued to cast a long shadow. My experiences had shaped my understanding of fear and the supernatural, and I carried the lessons learned with me as I ventured into new and unexplored territories. As I moved forward, I found solace in the knowledge that I had faced the darkness and survived. The mansion's legacy would continue to resonate, but I was determined to confront the unknown with courage and curiosity. The uninvited guest had left its mark, but it had also ignited a flame of exploration and discovery that would guide me through the shadows of the supernatural. Chapter 14, Epilogue. Years after the events, I returned to the area surrounding the mansion, driven by a sense of closure and reflection. The estate had changed hands several times, each new occupant encountering their own share of disturbances. The mansion, once a grand relic, now stood as a crumbling monument to its dark past. Standing before the estate, I felt a mix of nostalgia and apprehension. The mansion's dark history and the presence of the uninvited guest had shaped my life in ways I could never fully articulate. The entity's legacy, though daunting, had also fueled my quest for understanding and exploration. As I walked away from the estate, I looked back one last time. The mansion stood silent, its secrets and shadows lingering in the twilight. The uninvited guest, though no longer a direct presence in my life, had left an enduring mark on my soul. The darkness that had once haunted me was now a part of my story, a reminder of the enigmatic and mysterious world that lies beyond the veil of the ordinary. The journey through fear and darkness had been transformative, and as I continued my path, I carried with me the lessons learned and the strength gained from facing the unknown. The mansion's legacy would remain a part of me, but it was a legacy that had shaped me into someone who could confront the shadows and emerge stronger on the other side. Chapter 15, Unforeseen Consequences. Months after leaving the mansion, I found myself increasingly drawn to the paranormal world. The unsettling experiences had ignited a curiosity that I could not ignore. I began to conduct independent research into other haunted locations, seeking to understand if similar entities existed elsewhere. However, it was clear that the shadow of the mansion still loomed over me. I would frequently have dreams of the mansion, its dark hallways, and the oppressive feeling that had once haunted me. It seemed as though the entity's influence had extended beyond the mansion itself, affecting my dreams and thoughts. During one of my investigations, I encountered an old historian who specialized in supernatural phenomena. She was intrigued by my experiences and offered to collaborate on a study of haunted locations. Our research revealed that the mansion was not unique. Many sites had their own malevolent entities with similar characteristics. This realization only deepened my understanding of the paranormal, but also brought its challenges. Chapter 16, The Paranormal Network. Teaming up with the historian, I delved into the broader world of paranormal investigation. We established a network of researchers and enthusiasts, each with their own experiences and insights. Our goal was to create a comprehensive database of haunted locations and entities, with the hope of understanding their origins and behaviors. The network grew quickly, attracting individuals with a variety of backgrounds and expertise. We conducted investigations at several notable sites, gathering evidence and documenting our findings. The shared knowledge and experiences of the group helped to piece together the puzzle of the supernatural, but it also introduced new complexities and dangers. Our work revealed that the mansion was part of a larger network of sites, influenced by ancient rituals and practices. Each location had its own history, but many were connected by common themes: dark rituals, protective measures, and the struggle between the living and the dead. Chapter 17, The Cursed Artifact. In our research, we stumbled upon references to a cursed artifact believed to be connected to the mansion's entity. The artifact, an ancient amulet, had been passed down through various owners and was said to be a key component in summoning or controlling malevolent forces. Our investigation led us to an antique shop where the artifact was rumored to be located. The shop's owner, an elderly woman with an air of mystery, revealed that the amulet had indeed been in her possession. She spoke of its dark history and the many people who had sought it out, each encountering their own share of misfortune. We decided to acquire the artifact and study it further. The amulet was intricately designed with strange symbols and inscriptions that matched those found in the mansion's journal. Its presence felt heavy with an ancient power, and we could sense its influence even before performing any tests. Chapter 18: Echoes of the Past. With the cursed artifact in our possession, we began to experience unusual phenomena during our investigations. The presence of the artifact seemed to amplify the supernatural activity, leading to increased disturbances and apparitions. During one investigation at a historic mansion, we encountered a spectral figure that resembled the descriptions from the journal. The apparition was more tangible than any we had seen before, its features detailed and its presence overwhelming. The encounter was both fascinating and terrifying, pushing the boundaries of our understanding of the supernatural. We recorded the event and analyzed the data, finding that the artifact seemed to resonate with the entity's energy. It was as if the amulet had a direct link to the malevolent forces we encountered, suggesting that its influence extended beyond the mansion and into other haunted locations. Chapter 19: The Guardian's Warning. As we delved deeper into the artifact's history, we discovered that it had once been used by a group of ancient guardians tasked with protecting sacred sites. The guardians had performed rituals to keep malevolent forces at bay, but their methods had inadvertently led to the artifact's curse. The artifact's connection to the mansion was revealed to be a result of these ancient practices. The guardians had created a powerful binding spell that went awry, causing the entity to become a permanent fixture in the mansion. The amulet, originally a tool of protection, had become a conduit for the entity's power. We also learned that the artifact had been sought after by various individuals throughout history, each attempting to harness or dispel its power. The repeated handling of the artifact had only strengthened its curse, leading to the manifestations we had observed. Chapter 20: The Ritual Revisited. Determined to break the artifact's curse, we attempted to recreate and refine the original ritual described in the mansion's journal. Our goal was to reverse the binding spell and neutralize the entity's influence. We gathered the necessary components and prepared for the ritual. The process was complex and required precision, but we were confident that we could succeed with our combined knowledge. As we began the ritual, the atmosphere became charged with energy, and the artifact's power seemed to react. The ritual was intense, with the entity's presence becoming more pronounced. We faced a series of disturbances, shadows moving on their own, unexplained noises, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Despite these challenges, we persevered, hoping to break the curse and free the mansion from its dark influence. Chapter 21: The Entity's Retaliation. The entity's response to our efforts was fierce and relentless. As we neared the conclusion of the ritual, the disturbances intensified. The air grew colder, and the presence of the entity became almost tangible. It was as though the entity was aware of our intentions and was determined to thwart them. We experienced physical manifestations, objects flying across the room, sudden gusts of wind, and disembodied voices screaming in rage. The intensity of the entity's reactions made it clear that we were dealing with a powerful and malevolent force. Our attempts to complete the ritual were met with resistance, and it became apparent that we needed to adapt our approach. The entity's anger and desperation to maintain its hold over the mansion were evident, and we had to navigate through the turmoil to achieve our goal. Chapter 22: The Final Confrontation. In a climactic confrontation, we faced the full force of the entity's wrath. The ritual reached its peak, and the mansion's dark energy seemed to converge on us. The entity's presence was overwhelming, and the atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of malevolence. We pressed on, determined to complete the ritual despite the entity's resistance. As we performed the final incantations, the amulet glowed with a brilliant light, and the entity's roars of fury echoed through the mansion. The darkness seemed to writhe and contort, as if struggling against an unseen force. With a final burst of energy, the ritual reached its conclusion. The light from the amulet surged, pushing back the shadows and dispelling the entity's presence. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the mansion fell silent once more. Chapter 23. The Aftermath. In the wake of the ritual, the mansion felt transformed. The oppressive atmosphere that had once pervaded the estate was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and tranquility. The shadows and disturbances had dissipated, and the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. We assessed the damage and found that the mansion's condition had improved. The eerie feeling that had once lingered was now absent, and the air felt lighter. The artifact, having fulfilled its purpose, was returned to its resting place, its curse finally broken. Our success was bittersweet. While we had managed to free the mansion from its dark influence, the experience had taken a toll on us. The encounters with the entity had left their mark, and we were left to grapple with the emotional and psychological aftermath of our ordeal. Chapter 24. Rebuilding and Recovery. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life and recovering from the traumatic experiences. The mansion, though no longer haunted, remained a significant part of my past. I visited occasionally, ensuring that the estate was maintained and free from any lingering supernatural influences. The experience had transformed my perspective on the paranormal. I continued my research, but with a greater understanding of the complexities and dangers involved. The network of paranormal researchers and enthusiasts remained active, and we continued to explore and document haunted locations, sharing our findings with the wider community. I also sought therapy and support to address the psychological effects of the haunting. The process of confronting and understanding my fears helped me regain a sense of normalcy and control over my life. Chapter 25. Legacy and Reflection. As time passed, I reflected on the legacy of the mansion and its impact on my life. The uninvited guest had been a formidable presence, but it had also led to a journey of exploration and self-discovery. The experiences had shaped my understanding of fear, the supernatural, and the boundaries between the living and the dead. I continued to share my story through writing and speaking engagements, hoping to provide insight and guidance to others who might encounter similar phenomena. The mansion's history and the entity's influence became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the unknown forces that lie beyond our comprehension. The legacy of the mansion lived on in my work and research. The lessons learned from the haunting informed my approach to paranormal investigations and deepened my appreciation for the mysteries of the supernatural. Chapter 26. A New Beginning. With the mansion's dark chapter behind me, I embraced a new beginning. The experiences had been harrowing, but they had also led to personal growth and a renewed sense of purpose. I continued to explore the paranormal, but with a greater focus on understanding and respecting the unknown. I moved into a new home, one that felt like a fresh start. The transition was challenging, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. The mansion's legacy would always be a part of me, but I was determined to move forward with resilience and hope. As I settled into my new life, I looked forward to new experiences and opportunities. The journey through the darkness had been transformative, and I was ready to embrace the future with a renewed sense of purpose and curiosity. Chapter 27. The Phantom's Return. Years after my departure from the mansion, I received unsettling reports of strange occurrences in the area. Local residents spoke of sightings of a shadowy figure resembling the entity I had encountered. The reports suggested that the phantom might have returned, or perhaps another malevolent presence had taken its place. Curious and concerned, I decided to revisit the estate. The mansion, now restored and maintained, looked different from the last time I saw it. The once oppressive atmosphere had given way to a more peaceful environment, but the reports of disturbances raised questions about the true extent of the entity's influence. During my visit, I conducted a thorough investigation, seeking any signs of supernatural activity. The mansion appeared calm, and no immediate evidence of the entity's presence was detected. However, the reports and sightings from locals suggested that the mystery was not yet fully resolved. Chapter 28. Unraveling the Mystery. Determined to uncover the truth, I engaged with local investigators and researchers who had observed the recent disturbances. We compiled reports, conducted interviews, and analyzed any evidence related to the sightings of the shadowy figure. The investigation revealed that the recent disturbances might have been the result of lingering residual energy or a new entity altogether. The mansion's history of supernatural activity suggested that it was a nexus for such occurrences, and the presence of the phantom might be connected to unresolved aspects of its dark past. We conducted further research into the mansion's history and any recent changes that might have influenced the current disturbances. The goal was to determine whether the phantom was a remnant of the past or a new manifestation that required attention. Chapter 29. The Final Revelation. As the investigation progressed, we uncovered a startling revelation. It appeared that the entity I had encountered might have been a fragment of a larger, more complex supernatural phenomenon. The mansion's dark history and the cursed artifact had created a convergence of energies that attracted and retained malevolent forces. The phantom sightings and recent disturbances were linked to this convergence, suggesting that the mansion was a focal point for these supernatural energies. The true nature of the entity was more complex than initially understood, involving ancient rituals, curses, and unresolved spiritual conflicts. With this revelation, we realized that the mansion's legacy was intertwined with a broader tapestry of supernatural phenomena. The entity's influence was not confined to a single occurrence, but was part of a larger pattern of supernatural activity. Chapter 30. Confronting the Past. In light of the new findings, we prepared for one final confrontation with the entity. The goal was to address the residual energy and resolve any lingering issues associated with the mansion's dark past. The investigation team, including experts in various fields, conducted a comprehensive ritual to address the supernatural disturbances. The ritual was designed to cleanse the mansion of any lingering malevolent forces and restore balance to the energies associated with the estate. The process was intense, requiring careful coordination and a deep understanding of the mansion's history. The ritual aimed to neutralize the remaining energies and provide a sense of closure for any unresolved spiritual conflicts.